All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. This has been an amazing series thus far. My name is Kelsey Maynor. I'm a community influencer here in Atlanta, Georgia, doing some amazing work out here, and I really enjoy being here. And this is a great conversation we're about to have. We have some amazing people here on our panel today. First, let me introduce what we're doing. So my brother Terence Lester wrote a book called When We Stand. And what we're doing as a panel to kind of discuss some of the topics and conversation that are in this book. This is our last series for this conversation, so it should be a really good one. Really excited to talk about it. I want to introduce those who are part of this panel as they come in. So we're starting off with, I say, Erica Davis, and I'll let her introduce herself. She comes in here. Erica, hey, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Kelsey. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Erica Davis, and I bring greetings from Houston, Texas, Harris County, and where I'm currently an elected official for the Harris County Department of Education and a chief of staff for a law enforcement agency, the third largest constable's office in the country. And I am a civilian, and I build bridges between law enforcement and the community. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation, that when we stand, and really just getting into the weeds of why we're here.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you so much. I do remind you guys again, this what we're calling it is Healing Invisible Wounds. This is the event for today, and what we're talking about, our theme is finding your why. So with that, I want to introduce another part of our panel. Man, this guy is amazing. Brandon Frame, are you here?
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much, Kelsey. Brandon Frame, bringing you greetings from the Boogie Down Bronx. I am the founder of the Black Man Can Incorporated. Also, I am the director of social emotional learning at the Urban Assembly. I'm really excited to be here and talking about finding your why and making it, realizing it, bringing it to the forefront.
Cool. Amazing. Now, you know what's crazy? I didn't even talk about myself a little bit. My name is Kelsey Maynard. I am a community influencer here in Atlanta, Georgia. I work for City Council under Councilman Andre Dickens. I'm the community engagement officer citywide. Also am partner in the restaurant group that has the Atlanta Breakfast Club. You've never been to Atlanta? The Atlanta Breakfast Club is where you want to come to. I'm at one of our locations right now. Anyway, next, man of the hour, Terence Lester.
Hey, what's up, Kelsey? My name is Terence Lester. Many of you who have been here the past 2 nights or just know of the work that we're doing in Atlanta, Georgia, I founded an organization called Love Beyond Walls, and we advocate on behalf of those without an address. And we have been doing this work a little over 7 years, and it's been the most exciting and joy-filled thing that I've gotten a chance to do in my life. And the reason I say that is because we operate from the lens or the framework that we exist to create a world where no one is invisible. And so there's an invisibility that is happening amongst people who are experiencing homelessness with the rise and the increase of the criminalization that is happening to our neighbors without an address. And so we advocate on behalf of them, incorporating narrative justice, but also walking alongside our brothers and sisters out of the plight of homelessness.
Amazing. Now, Terence, I don't know if you remember, but I met you many, many years ago. And a friend of ours, Whitney Barlow, she used to work at a barbershop and a hair salon I used to go to back when I was in college. And she was telling me, like, you got to watch what he's got going on. He was sleeping under the bridges. He was doing this walk. He was doing so much stuff. I just started following along, man. It was an amazing experience to see somebody reaching in to humanity in that way. Without jumping in too deep, too fast, I am curious. You said a couple times that you addressed a group of people as those without an address. Right. So I'm going to first direct the question to you. Like, when we're talking about homelessness and the homeless population, you made it specific to state those around the address. I know it's really hard to communicate without saying that homeless guy over there or that bum or whatever. How did you get to the point of trying to not dehumanize people in that manner? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kelsey. So my passion derives from a multitude of places. One being that there were times when I experienced a temporary homelessness myself as a teenager. I remember running away from home, sleeping in parks, on in public settings, out of my car. There were times when I had to sleep on the floor of my friends' homes, right? And so I'll never forget, I had a friend who I write about in this book. His name was Eric, but he had a father, which was one of the first men that I ever saw love his family. He loved his kids. He loved his children. He went to work. He worked hard, but he also was an intricate part of the community. And he pastored a church, and he had all this transitional housing. His church was comprised of people experiencing homelessness. And so as a teenager, he was the first guy that ever told me that I was going to be a leader, right? In the crux of my circumstances, he saw me. And so, like in my last book, I describe home as a place of acceptance, belonging, and where you are seen, right? And so home goes way beyond an address or a physical location. Home is about a place where you are seen, where you feel accepted, and where you belong. And so the empathy and the compassion that he showed me actually helped me to overcome a lot of my circumstances. And I always, even when I'm doing this work now, I never forget where I've come from. And he was the one that told me that I would one day use the pain that I experienced early on in my life as a bridge and as a vehicle to be empathetic towards other people who suffered with the same plight. And then the other part of that is I just think that we live in a society and culture where we have an empathy deficit. One of my friends who authored the book Brave Souls writes this quote that I oftentimes use when I'm speaking somewhere. She says that empathy is the virtue that is muscular enough to handle the complexities of our time, of our day. And I think that is so true. And it embodies what Martin Luther King was talking about in terms of his phraseology using the world house. I think homelessness is much larger than a couple of guys standing on the street corner. There are over 150 million people in the world without an address. And I just truly believe that we should be about the whole community. And just because a person does not have an address does not mean that they're not your neighbor.
Yeah.
That brings me into another question. But before I ask this question, I do want to remind you guys that are watching that we are intended to give away a free book of Terence's book, When We Stand. So stay engaged, keep listening, staying tuned, and we'll be announcing people throughout this panel that we'll be giving away a free book. So stay engaged with us. Ask some questions as you can, and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered. Now, in the question, I want to ask Erica or Brandon. I'm curious as to how we birth wise. Like how do we get to that point of passion and focus on a certain thing? Is it a personal experience, as you said, or is it something that we watched that triggered us? What triggered your why, Erica?
Well, thank you for asking me that, because I am still evolving. As the climate continues to change in our society, those changes becomes the why as well. But the root of the effort of wanting to accomplish that, it is stemmed from triggers. It is stemmed from obstacles faced, or just saying, look, I grew up here and I want to get here, but I want to go back there and provide that education or that exposure. And as I said, evolving into my why, I always felt that I believe in protest. I believe in supporting efforts and so forth. But my why became being a part of the system getting inside of it and then making the change. And that is where I am today with my why, because I know that things need to change. I know eliminating complexion as a sign of aggression is something that we need to change within the system of my agency and others. And so I have several whys, one with chief of staff for a law enforcement agency, but then also as far as education. I believe that all communities and different cultures within the community learn differently. And that is my new why. And so if my kids love lyrics, then I want to teach literacy through lyrics, because that is what is needed for today. So, you know, every day is a different story that creates my why.
Hear that? Brandon, question for you. It's funny because Erica mentioned that, you know, she's still kind of developing some of that why and where that passion really lies and what triggers it and what keeps her going. You created an amazing brand. So I'm curious, how were you able to shift between the apathy and the passion? Like, oh, I see this problem, I'm seeing this issue, and translate that into action?
I appreciate that question. And so for me, a lot of this, it starts, one of my favorite quotes that I live by is, once you make an observation, you have an obligation. And for me, I made an observation that Black men and boys needed to see positive images of themselves and needed to have their stories told. And so that's kind of like the catalyst there. And then I started a blog, right? Like the Black Man Can started in 2010 as a blog, and it has grown into a lifestyle brand. It has grown into a nonprofit organization. It has grown into a digital media platform. And I'm just constantly looking at and seeing what needs to be done, needs to be happen to showcase positive images. Like in 2018, we had the Black Man Can Awards, and Terence was an honoree, you know? So just thinking about all the different ways we can celebrate Black men, we can educate Black men, we can inspire, because ultimately I think ideas are spiritual children seated by God inside of us, and he places the tools around us and the people around us to manifest those ideas into reality. And so it's just been this really wonderful journey from the starting point of, once you make an observation, you have an obligation. And then I've just been consistent and persistent and paying attention to the world in terms of the things that we create to make sure that that observation that I made and the obligation that I feel I have, and actualizing that to make it a real thing for communities across the country and across the world.
Word. Man. So I'm curious about action, right? And I'm gonna sit around this second for a minute, because for me it gets interesting, because you want to do something, but you're not quite sure, like, what should I do? You said you started a blog, you know, like you just start doing things. Terence, question. So when you first started out with I'm not sure if you first started out with the whole I'm gonna experience what they experience. I'm gonna sleep under this bridge and talk to people and figure out what's going on. What made you take that step? And then being amongst that space, how'd you not get discouraged when sometimes your efforts didn't always result in transformation? That make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. In all honesty, like I oftentimes say, that diet is more than just food. It's the things that you intake, it's the conversations that you have, it's what you consume, it's what you visualize. It's like a gathering of all of these things. And early on, when I was in my early 20s, one of the things that I had to become was a questionnaire. Right. Brandon Frame uses his organization to teach young guys how to tie ties, brings them together to talk about some of the intricate details that they never learn. Right. Well, that was a part of my reality. I didn't learn how to tie a tie until I was in my late teenage years. Right. Nobody ever shook my hand and told me you're supposed to look a man in his face. Right. So there were so many different gaps that existed, which created this hunger in me where I wanted to learn things that I was never taught. And so I had to become what I call a questionnaire. I got and placed myself in a community of older men, many of which became mentors to me. And I started asking questions. I think one of the most important things that you can do when you're on your journey of discovering your why and your purpose and the meaning that your life will have and the legacy you want to create is that you have to ask the right types of questions. And it's not just the questions to those people who have platforms or have these large amounts of followers, because some of the greatest wisdom that I ever received were from people that many people will never even know. Like you have to do like an assessment of the community that you have around you, and then pose questions to that community to learn from people's mistakes and their experiences, but also ask people what they see in you. Sometimes, being around people, you can ask them to be honest with you. And there are people who've made observations about your uniqueness, your skill sets, even the things that come up in your speech, the things that you've talked about prior. And those people are now given an opportunity to speak into those things and call those things out. I'll never forget having a teacher earlier in my career literally tell me that I had a gift of writing, right? I would write these poems and these quotes and I would send them out. And I'll never forget, I started doing spoken word because I thought I was going to be like a spoken word poet. And I had this job where I was working in a warehouse and I would literally line boxes up on my lunch break and literally practice speaking to them like these writings or whatever. But I'll never forget the seeds that were planted in me through the observation of those that were closest to me. Community is essential for anybody who is wanting to discover their why. And, fast forwarding, I'm, leading this organization and doing a bunch of advocacy work now. And the thing that keeps me going, honestly, are the stories from the people that we seek to humanize. I used to talk about how, I was advocating for the voiceless. And then I had this realization when I got entrenched in the work that everybody has a voice, right? Some voices are heard while others are silenced. And the thing that I'm doing the most now is I'm fighting to pass the microphone, right? So those who have not been given a chance to speak have the chance to speak and have their dignity affirmed, no matter their social location in life. And so the stories of the people who have the courage to wake up every single day and suffer through the plight of poverty is my motivation.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, I got a question for you.
Okay.
I'm in nowhere near completely understanding my why, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think whys evolve. I think God has the ability to use us where we are, and then as we develop, use us even more in different spaces, in different places, different times. But you're in Houston, right?
Yes.
I'm not familiar with Houston. I've only been there once in passing, I believe. But tell me an interesting conversation that you learned something from an unlikely source. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember I was at Georgia Tech one day a few years ago during a mayoral race, and instead of being in the room with the people, the candidates running for mayor, I spent 30 minutes outside talking to the janitor. And he was an older white gentleman, and it was the most astounding conversation we had, and it realized he was a Trump supporter. His views were different than mine, but when I left that conversation, we had a lot of stuff in common. He said, I really just want to provide for my family. I want to make sure that they're set up for success and that I'm able to work and do these things to make sure that they can do the things they want to do. And I was like, brother, me too. You know what I mean? And we're at the end of the day, we have the same value. So if you could share a story that has helped develop you, but it came from an unlikely source.
Well, as we hear the sirens in the background, every day that I speak to a white man in a uniform, I hear a different story. And what it does for me is it helps me understand where his mindset is when coming in contact with someone on the street, someone that doesn't have an address, someone who's from different communities, or a different officer from a different culture background. I get to sit and talk and hear from them day to day, and it is different day to day. And what developed out of that is the platform of being able to dialogue, having uncomfortable conversations daily, and knowing where that individual is in their mindset of culture relevance, and relating to any particular community, and then helping them bringing them along to understand a different perspective. And so when I started to realize that was needed continuously, systemically, then I said, well, this is what our children need. They need to let this air out of how they feel and understand why this person does this, why this officer does this, or why, and then the officer can understand why the community does what they do. And that's why it's so important to place people who understand certain communities to have that conversation, because they relate. And so just speaking of a conversation, every day I'm learning a different perspective and a different mindset, and it'll blow your mind of where their upbringing and how they're thinking. And then I try to meet them where they are and then bring them along, and vice versa. If they hear where I am in regards to them, then I've asked them to bring me along. But you have to come with facts, and you have to give me some credible information that I can understand. But that is how I start to try and change and develop my whys.
Word. You brought up something interesting. As I've gotten older, I've became a questionnaire. As Terence said, I ask a lot of questions. I try to gain things. It was very interesting in your book. It was this piece about interconnection. And I think you broke down like it was on like the morning routine of where's your soap come from? Where'd that cloth to wash your face come from? Where's your shirt come from? Like how interesting it is that so many cultures and so many countries and so many people are connected in just small ways that we may not recognize. Brandon, I'm curious because we are in a great wave of support Black business, buy Black, support this, circulate the Black dollar. But if we can be honest, like how can we, if that makes any sense, you know what I mean? And she said, for perspective, dealing with your brand and how it's set up now, how do you address, building up of Black culture, but also understanding how interconnected other cultures are to everything else?
Oh man,
can you? How can we talk about that?
What's so funny or interesting about that question, and I'll get into my answers. I'm also a doctoral student, so I'm constantly reading and writing and having these conversations in the ivory tower, but also I'm a practitioner, so I do the work as well. And so my first thought there is, I'm absolutely for Black liberation. I think all these are different tenets of Black liberation, support Black business and whatnot. But there's one thing that we have to grapple with when we talk about that, is that liberation and capitalism don't go together, right? They don't. They don't. The two things don't. Based off the tenets of what capitalism is, it has to be a bottom, has to be a top. And so, yes, we need to definitely support Black businesses. But and thinking about that, like we can't, when you think about like Pablo Freire and his writings, is like what happens, the oppressed, if they become in power, they only do to other people what was once done to them, right? And capitalism aids in that, right? So like we can't say, oh, I want it to be just like what white people have, because then you're just looking for another group, right? And then even in the Black liberation aspect, right? Like you have Black men who want these things, right? But because of our male privilege, we will oppress Black women. Well, those are conversations that people have a really hard time talking about, right? But that's the first piece. And then when we think about it as a whole, the book that I encourage other people to read, along with Terence's book, is The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee, and really thinking about, okay, what has racism cost us all, right? And how do we take that? And so everybody understands that, and then we can move forward. Because what I'm constantly talking about, especially within the realm of education, is a lot of times in schools or in our districts, we're like, we're preparing students for college and career. And when we think about the work that Terence is doing, we'll think about the work that Erica is doing, and the work that you're doing, Kelsey, the question that we have to ask ourselves are, how are we preparing our students? How are we preparing human beings for college, career, and community, right? And so when we add that community piece in there, right, it makes you think, because like at the end of the day, I do want to live in a multiracial community with a bunch of different people, different backgrounds. Research shows that when you go to a school like that, or you live in a community like that, you're more successful in life, right? Because you have these varying perspectives you see and have heard from different people. So we really have to take that approach and really stand in the gap of learning about our history, learning about the sum of us, and learning about how we can all live in community together, and also tackle those issues around patriarchy, sexism, capitalism, and how they all interplay into all of this, so that we can actually move forward together, because we can live in community together. Everybody can have a livable wage. Everybody can have an address, right? But when are we going to make sure that those systems are in place so that everybody gets to actualize that to their needs, their benefit?
I just wanted to ask something, Kelsey, if you don't mind. And I didn't get a chance to mention, my friend reminded me that African proverb that people are people through people. And I am because we are, right? And it means to me that our humanity depends on the quality of relationships in our community and in society. Like Brandon was saying, like, you want that diversity. You want to just, have that evolving of that why. And I just forgot to mention that earlier.
No, right on time. I think you forgot it for a reason. We can bring it up now. People are people. What is it again? Give me that problem.
People are people through people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I used to say people hurt people. I used to say
hurt people. That's still
yeah.
Parents, man. I'm curious. A wise man told me many years ago, I had started a prayer call, like a daily prayer. Like, I'm gonna do it Monday through Friday. I'm gonna do a prayer call. My friend called and says, "Hey man, do me a favor." He said, "What?" "Stop looking at the numbers." But I always get on the conference call and I would look at, like, man, only 4 people called in today. Only 10 people called in today. I want more. I want to make a bigger change. Starting off at the beginning, Terence, how did you not get discouraged and focus on the numbers?
Yeah, it's a great question. Happily, we'll answer that. And I still use this framework to this day. I'll never forget, I was sitting at a coffee shop when I was literally sketching out what is now Love Beyond Walls. I was having a conversation with one of my brothers. His name is Broderick. And I was telling him all these things that I was hoping that I would be able to do. And then I turned to him and I said, man, doing this work, I want to maintain my heart, right? I want to maintain my heart. And I never want to allow the pursuit of numbers or impact to derail my focus from the main mission. Right. And so early on, I developed a set of metrics or what I would define as success that is radically different from what other people would define as success. Like if I was to show you what keeps me going, like knowing someone's name, no matter if it's one person, noticing one person, building a conversation, humanizing one story, all of my metrics are very small because I understood that whenever you're on a journey, there will be highs and there will be lows, right? And so if you get into a place where you're so focused on the highs and that you base all of your success and what you define as progress based upon all of these external things, when the lean moments come, then they will demotivate you or deflate you, right? And so one of the ways that I've been able to stay grounded is always remembering my original whys, right? My original intents, my original mission. And I still hold true to those same things today. I still have some of the same practices, even leading the organization. There are times when instead of allowing, people that I could delegate things to, I would go myself. Like I maintain my heart and stay connected to the community. What Brandon was describing is scholar activism, right? I too I'm in a PhD program, and we always talk about this elitism of this body of knowledge that only certain people have access to, and then that does not get pragmatized, right? There's no living out of the things that we're studying in theory in higher education. And so like one of the things that has always kept me grounded was just to stay true to my heart and stay connected to community. Everything happens in community. And that's the message that we're trying to bring forth in this book.
Oh, man. Wonderful. You keep bringing up some great points. I'm always been curious because I work for the city of Atlanta. So I'm working in city council. And I get a lot of phone calls about different things that happen throughout the city. A lot of times, one big thing that everybody in the news is talking about now is Atlanta and its crime. Atlanta and its young people, the water boys, the panhandling. There's so much that gets brought up that just put on a national stage. You made I think there's a something in your book about otherizing. Yeah, it's like there's us and then there's them. And in our work, I think we all are in the space where we work to a certain level. And I credit you, Terence, for really challenging me in this thought process of not otherizing, but how do you were talking about the system, there's a systematic change that has to be done, but how do we, in our whys, try to fix some of the otherizing that we do? Because I caught myself, you mentioned elitism. I was called an elitist when I was in high school. I didn't know what that meant. But in our treks and in our work, how do we try to make sure that we're not creating a space where we're uplifting one group while still otherizing other groups? Anybody can answer that if y'all want to. If y'all been thinking about it. It's played these kind of, I was up, real talk, I was up all night. I couldn't go to sleep. I woke up and I was like, man, I went down, I'm reading over your book again. I'm writing questions down because it's been tricking my mind since I picked the book up, man. So
yeah, I think the otherization of people happens based upon how we define worth in this country. I think Brandon lifted up, what capitalism does in our social context. And so when I talk about otherization, I'm simply coming from a place of how do we define worth? How do we determine who's worthy and who isn't worthy, right? When we talk about worth, we normally talk about worth through the extrinsic things, right? What kind of car you drive, who do you associate with, where do you get your coffee, what part of town do you live in, where did you get your degree, what fraternity or sorority you belong to, like all these extrinsic things, right? And so once we figure those things out, we say, oh, those persons are worthy, right? But my question is, what happens when you don't have those things? Are you less worthy, right? And so what I like to start with is the intrinsic worth and value of every single person. That if you are alive and breathing, address or not, disabled or not, if you're a woman, like if you are older in age, people get discriminated against so many different things. I'm starting with the very inherent dignity that you have on the inside. And so I also lift up this quote that is near dear to my heart, that everyone is deserving of dignity, no matter how damaged the package that carries it, right? And when you think about that framework, it suggests that it's not about what's on the exterior, it's about the contents on the inside. And if we start to measure worth based upon the intrinsic inherent worth and value of every single person, then we level the playing field, and we can no longer deem people worthy, deem people that should be excluded, and those who shouldn't be excluded. I mean, just think about it, even in the architecture, right? And how we design our buildings. One of the things that's popping up right now all across the country is this thing called hostile architecture, right? Where cities will place boulders underneath bridges, or they will develop park benches that have railing in the middle, or they will strip away places to sit down in subway stations. There are even some cities right now that have outlawed sleeping outside, period. So if you're found sleeping outside, the law suggests that you're being criminal, and you're criminalized for being poor. And so I think we have to do a better job at how we measure worth in society and culture. And that could serve as the accountability system to keep us from otherizing people.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that was so good. And just to add to that, right? Like thinking about those things that are state sanctioned, right? In terms of I've never heard that term before, but I love what you said. And so that even lends itself to like, well, let's talk about transportation, right? Like why doesn't the MARTA go to Cobb County, right? Like I'm just saying, right? Like there's these things, right, that we do, and it goes back to worth, because, well, there's a group of people we want to come and live in this community, right? Or if you go out to LA, they fought so hard to connect like South Central Los Angeles to Santa Monica by a train, because, well, the worth, right? And how we're deeming worth of certain people. So I just wanted to, and how that's just ingrained in, government, let alone other spaces and places within the countries.
Yeah, listening to you all, it just reminds me of filling in the gap of inequities, but within the system, and making sure that system is filling in the gaps of inequities. And so when you talk about why does this go here, and why are these people not, being given the resources, it's like someone on that inside that's allowing the disbursement, or who's making the decisions, have to have that voice that says, what about this group? What about them? Our youth are suffering. 48% of our Harris County jail are Black, and then they're let out in the middle of the night, and they're expecting no recidivism. It's like people who are making the decisions, and that's where, when you said accountability matters, and filling in the gaps of inequities truly matter.
That's so profound. Wow. Like, I'm studying public policy, and one of the Deborah Stone, in her book, Policy Paradox, talks about even a policy is telling a story, right? There is a hero, right, and a villain. There are problems and solutions, right? And so even the very framework of the design of a policy is telling a story. What I pose is that we need to have this form of narrative justice. And when I talk about narrative justice, it's reclaiming the narratives of those who have been silenced, right? It's providing a different framework. George Lakoff talks about reframing being the fabric of social change, that we have to literally learn how to take these narratives, deconstruct them, reframe them to empower the persons who have been villainized, demonized, and marginalized. And I think that provides a greater understanding of the plights and concerns of those who have been left out of the political process.
It's getting good now, guys. Everybody that's viewing, I do want to remind you that there is a chat going on. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please do not hesitate to type them up. We will address any questions at the end, towards the end of this, in the next couple of minutes, actually. And I want to remind you that we are going to be gifting away When We Stand, Terence Lester's book that we're discussing right now. We will be gifting it away. So stay engaged, stay in with us, keep listening, and add to the conversation by sending in your questions. I got one more question. This conversation's getting good. I got one more question though. I understand how public policy works. I work in City Hall. I know how the legislation works. And you're right, it does kind of tell the story. When we had an issue with Airbnbs and parties, there was legislation drawn up to say, no, what, there's no more parties and Airbnbs. Matter of fact, we're going to put all these restrictions on who can Airbnb and what neighborhoods. And it was a clear story of what neighborhoods weren't liking these parties and what didn't like the attention that was coming to these homes. It was like the mansions in Buckhead and this and that. It was very clear what was being said in this legislation. But I'm also a proponent of what can I set up? How does my why align with what I'm seeing? And how do I make a change in space? Because we have, police brutality going on, and there's a slew of things that's happening right now, and it's just triggering some of our experiences, triggering our whys. But what steps can we take to do things now in our own space? Brandon, I wanted to ask you that question because you took that step. Like, what you got going on, man? What steps did you take, and what steps did you take to put your why into action?
Yeah, I think it's thinking about, so there's like what you're passionate about as well as what you're good at. And sometimes those two things aren't the same thing, right? That's one thing that we should hone in on, that sometimes it doesn't always, we always talk about passion, but what you're passionate about and what you're good at could be two different things. So thinking about those two lanes, find your thing, right? So for me, if you use the quote, once you make an observation, you have an obligation. So you make observations about a lot of things. There's a lot of things that I definitely see, and I'm like, man, that is an injustice. That's wrong. But necessarily what I'm good at or my gifts or something that I'm passionate about, like I can donate to somebody else who's really leading that work. But find your space, right? I think about this when after George Floyd, and there were marches all across the country, right? And in different cities, they were locking people up, right? But you had attorneys, giving their time and their skill set to make sure that people got out and didn't have to, deal with bail or have to go to court or anything like that, because that's like, this attorney that's what they're good at. That's their skill. So I'm going to help in that way. Right. So I think it's really important about making an observation and then you have an obligation, but thinking about your skills and what you're passionate about and applying it to that one place. And also when you do that, don't feel like I'm not doing enough. Like if whatever your thing is, that's your thing and you stick to it and that's what you're working on. For me, it's Black men and boys. For somebody else, it's LGBTQIA, issues. For somebody else, it's what's going on across the world in Palestine and in Haiti, right? So you find your thing and stick to that. And again, for self-care purposes, when you land your lane, it's okay to stay in that lane, advocate for it, and not feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough, because I think that's something that happens to people when they're like, I'm not doing enough. No, you are doing enough if you pick your lane that you want to stay in and advocate for.
And I totally agree with that. My perspective on policy, and with all due respect, but policies are what needs to be on the stand sometimes. I think I don't do well with gray areas. I don't do well with ambiguity. And I think that there's too many, as we know, things are hidden. Racism is hidden. Systemic oppression is hidden. And if people can stop and say, I like to read your policy, And addressing those issues, I think most businesses or most governmental agencies would probably look at me and say, you could be quiet. Well, I'm not going to be quiet, because the only way we can see change, the only way that we can say to our whys that this is why I'm doing this, or this is why this needs to change, is to really read what is. And he brought up the case and Chauvin, the trial. It's like that policy needed to be on the stands as well. And if more and more accountability is taken of those policies, and not that, oh, it was, but we're changing it. What is it today? And so that is probably my new why. And it's going to forever be, because different people change the policies and procedures.
Terrence, there was a question from the audience, and they asked, how did you get to the place of passing the mic and sharing your platform?
Yeah, I mean, to Erica's point, I think, so like even in the political process, there are, hidden power dynamics that happen, right? And that are at play. One that I want to lift up to make this point is the law of non-decisions. A non-decision is when a public official actually leaves the interests or concerns of a community off the agenda, right? Even when we think about when council members meet or politicians meet, they're meeting during times when community members can't even, enter into the space and offer up their concerns. And so a lot of the interest that community members have as it relates to either policy designs or plans that are being made about their communities, that's a form of exerting power, leaving people out of the narrative, right? And so for me, when I think about my own process and evolution into my leadership role, for me, I understood what it means. I lean into my pain. My pain has become a passion, right? Once you embrace or confess what it is that has burdened you and you embrace it, then that thing can become a God, right? And that God translate into a gift that you serve the world. And for me, I want to be the person to the other person who is searching or trying to find their reason for living, or find this affirmation of their worth and value, because many people offered that to me. Like, why would I withhold what was offered to me from somebody else who needs that very same thing? And this is what lifts up my point about we're all interconnected. I love the language that ML King is using, talking about a world house, that the world is our address, right? He goes on to talk about, this in his 1967 sermon, Christmas sermon on peace, when he's talking about, when you wake up in the morning, you may be, handed a sponge from a Pacific Islander, or you may get your coffee from another part of the world. And he was painting this picture to help us to understand that we're all connected. And I just live out of the framework that what I do for you, I'm also doing for myself. And I answer the question that, I am my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper, the other person's keeper, that I want to leave this world better than I found it, so to speak, the frame of world that I am in. And so, yeah, I mean, it just derives out of this, experience of having someone display to me the thing that I needed, and me finding my own purpose and reason and wanting to offer that same thing to someone else. We got to get away from, gaining things in our lives and then becoming a Dead Sea, so to speak, right? It's called the Dead Sea for a reason, because there you go. It's one way in, there's no way out. Things die when there's no flow, right? And so I want to live my life as a conduit, and that's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yo, I'm really liking how this conversation is going. My mind is just racing right now. I I'm right here on Auburn Avenue. I'm a block away from the King Center, and I see what this community is, and it's very interesting. I had an opportunity to speak with a senior. There's a senior high rise right on Auburn Avenue by the King Center, and she was coming out of there, and I just happened to spark up a conversation, and she was pointing out different individuals on the block. She was like, "Yeah, no, that's Larry, and Larry, he's an alcoholic now, but I remember Larry when he was growing up, and his mother was shot right over here, and his dad had fled the scene because the gang that was trying to get him, and that's how Larry ended up staying here by himself. And we looked after Larry for a while, but this is his story." So when they were asking about Pastor Mike, I'm like, I've heard so many interesting stories that, again, allows me to gain a perspective that stops me from this weird act of judgment that we tend to do when we see people. And that's my experience. And I'm like, when I leave here, I'm going to take a walk around the block. I speak to people. I make it my point to speak to people, and make sure that they're seen. Because it's weird to walk past people and be like, I don't put my headphones on and walk past. But it's very, the connection that's wild to me. But there's a question that was posed and said, how do we move past helplessness and the feeling that our contributions or ideas hopelessness, how do we move past hopelessness and the feeling that our contribution or ideas won't impact anything?
I guess I can be the first to address that. I don't think hopelessness ever ends for me. I'm just being transparent, because when you see the cyclical issues, and I say cyclical because everyone says they're going to do something. Everyone had the efforts of doing it, but when you still see the circumstances continue, that is where hopelessness comes from for me. But to gain my strength to push past that is one person at a time. And just like you said, going out in the community, connecting, and just like Terence mentioned about that community connection, they give you hope when you just talk to them. They will give you that hope, because whatever resources or anything that was needed and they received it, that will give you that effort and that motivation to continue. But moving past it, I'm going to be honest, every day, once you get a good positive, I see a negative. And it's because that's how much more work still needs to be done.
I think you're muted, Brandon.
It's cool and it's comfortable. It can be comfortable to just do it in your community, right? It's not like sometimes like the issue that you may be tackling in your neighborhood is probably an issue. It's an issue in a bunch of other neighborhoods, but it's okay to just tackle that issue in your neighborhood, right? And then ideally, what's great is when we connect the islands. I like to call them islands of success. So we can create collective and sustainable change. But it's cool, like, I think about all the different schools that I work with across the country, and like this school has an amazing, boys program, and they're really impacting the young men, and that's awesome, right? And those young men are going to remember these experiences, and it's going to be great. So, yes, a lot of times we want to scale things, and I want to do it all over the country. But in terms of moving past the hopelessness, is just, it's okay to have the program in your community with 15 people, whatever it is. If it's a senior citizen program, it's for millennials, it's for Gen Z, whatever it may be. But it's cool to just do something in your community and make impact. It doesn't, even if it's a passion project or a side hustle, it doesn't have to become this big, huge business, right? It's okay to just do something in your community. And then it's also okay to bring it and make it large. But I think when we think about the idea of moving past hopelessness, I think sometimes hopelessness settles in because we're thinking about it being something that's such a huge issue, but you can tackle that huge issue in your community and make some impact and change lives.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you're right. We are exposed to so much now that we have these ideas of what success and what impact really looks like. Like, how can I impact the entire neighborhood or entire city or and impact the entire world? I'm like, well, you start with the person next to you. You start with the senior citizens in your neighborhood who struggle to get groceries. You start at home. You go to the local schools and you talk to the kids. That's how I started. I used to go to middle schools and high schools, and I would go to the senior citizen homes and I would play bingo and talk to them and just soak up, wisdom. And I would go to the kids and I would just take that same wisdom I got from the seniors and I would give it to the kids and be like, this is what life feels like, and you're right. As soon as we start comparing, we want to go on a large scale. I learned this, that you can work in a small group and talk to 15 kids at a school twice a month, once every quarter. But what that impact on that kid is can grow further than you could ever know. You know what I mean? Like, nobody truly knows what the seeds of an apple go to. Did it get replanted? Did it make more apple trees? Did it make more fruit for more things? It can grow exponentially. You might not have seen it grow. You can plant a tree and never see how big that tree grows. But the act of starting and planting that tree is a feat in itself. I think we should start looking at it that way. What was I able to do? What can I do now? What did I start? What conversations was I having? What books was I reading? When I got When We Stand, after I read it, I shared it with somebody else. It might have influenced me to do something in my neighborhood and influenced that person to do something in their neighborhood. Now we just grew to 2 neighborhoods. That book gets shared. Another person buys a book because we're reading the book. We start a book club. Now you've created that growth that you were looking for. You might not have seen the fruit of it all, but you're making a difference. You're making a change. And hopelessness only happens when we start to get into our heads of what we expect it to look like.
Yeah.
I want to remind you guys that if you just keep on commenting, keep on sending some of these questions over. I know we're showing the trailer very soon, but if you have any more questions, please type those questions up, ask them. I know you're on Facebook and YouTube, wherever you are, ask those questions. We're still getting them. And don't forget, we are giving away When We Stand. Somebody will get that free book today. That's
great. Even though I'm on here, even those of us doing the work need the motivation. Even, continuing the day, even though I'm right here with you, great people, I myself may have needed that motivation just today. And I just want to thank you all for that, because we are doing great things. And Terrence, you are doing great things. Brandon, you are doing great things. And Kelsey, it's just when we have that time, we have each other to uplift each other. And like you said, if you have 15 kids that you can help, if you have 15 homeless individuals, people who don't have an address, or those that are coming out of our jails, you did something. And that is the way to look at it. So I thank y'all for that.
Absolutely. So this is our last question that was posed. What has been the greatest leadership challenge? What has been your greatest leadership challenge? All jump up at once now.
I think this is such an amazing question, because on the journey in your career, you get a challenge each time. So like, I remember that one challenge me. So I'm going to share a few, because I think I can't really say one that's been greatest, because each time you get over the hump of something else becomes an issue, right? So at one point, right, there's the Black Man Can, and then even in my professional career within education, I was getting search firms calling me. Right. And so this was a challenge. Was what happened. I was getting search firms calling me for jobs. But then when I went on the jobs, there was questions that they were asking me that I didn't have answers to, i.e., have you ever supervised someone, and tell me how you have motivated them to do their job. But I hadn't had an opportunity. tell me about how you have managed a budget and find money to do these things, right? So a great leadership challenge was getting opportunities to do roles so that I could be prepared for the next level of leadership or the next level of my career. I can remember getting to a point of now in a place where I am hiring people, and like, how do I hire and build a team so that everything happens, right? How do I build systems and structures so that the work can happen and it happens seamlessly? So I think over time you constantly get these challenges, and then what happens when your team grows from, oh, you have 2 direct reports to then having 14 direct reports? That's a completely different thing. And then so the last piece of that leadership challenge is now that for me, right, when you have all these people reporting to you, not only are you their boss, you're part of their own personal development, right? So a leadership challenge is like, how do I make sure I move my team forward with goals, right? But at the same time, I'm developing them so that they can move forward in their careers. I think about Nick Saban at Alabama, and I think about Bill Belichick and the New York Patriots, right? New England Patriots. And there's these ideas about them being, great coaches. But one hallmark for me, what makes them really great coaches, is that when you look through college football or you look through professional football, there are people who went to study under them and to then go out and do to become head coaches. And so I think about the work that I do in terms of a leadership challenge, and I'm continuing still growing in it, is how do I develop people so that you may meet me, but then you'll go in other places within, education and some other spaces that I walk in, and people will say, oh, I studied under Brandon Frame. I learned from Brandon, how to do this job, or he gave me these experiences. So that's been the most recent greatest leadership challenge, is having people report to you. And developing them in a way that they can go off and be successful once they're no longer working for you, and they actually become a peer somewhere else at the same level that you're at.
Yeah, I think that is really great, Brandon. I think that's such profound wisdom that as you grow and develop on this journey, there will be different phases of your leadership development, right? I would like to even reframe the question that is being asked, what has been your greatest leadership challenge, to how do you manage challenges when they arise, right? One of the ways in which I've been able to continuously grow as a leader is, one, I have to ask myself, who is around me, right? Who are around me that are my peers, but also who's around me that may be a little further than I am, that can give me some sense of wisdom. There was this speaker that was giving a talk one time, and he was talking about his leadership growth journey. And he got to this place where he was in a place of tremendous growth, and it wasn't the place that he had just previously left, right? And he started to have new challenges. And he said he never forget sitting down with one of his mentors, and his mentors telling him that the new challenges were normal, right? He had never faced them before. He had never experienced them before. And he didn't know what challenges would exist on that and that part of his journey. And what I'm suggesting is that you have to make sure that you are surrounding yourself with people who may be a little further than you, where you can ask questions, but that can also speak to some of the issues that may trip you up. Another thing that I would like to lift up is we've got to move away from the copy and paste culture, because I think sometimes we look at people's lives through the lens of social media, and we say, hey, we want to be there right now, right? And so it's even to the point where it's gotten to the point where people would try to copy other people's strengths, and it's not even their own strength, right? And I would like to lift up that on your leadership development journey, that you should take time to be more introspective and learn about yourself and your strengths and your assets, as opposed to focusing on building up your weaknesses. We have weaknesses for a reason. That is to let us know that we are to partner with, in collaboration with, other people who may be strong in the areas that we are weak. That's when the power of collaboration and community truly exists, where we focus on our strengths, we continue to develop and grow in our strengths, but we also are connecting with people who are strong in areas that we're not strong in. That helps us to overcome some leadership challenges that may arise because we are weak in areas that may be challenging to us, right? And the last thing is this, that I wrote down: you have to develop a leadership plan, right? A leadership development plan. For the last, 10 plus years of my life, every single year, I sit down and I ask myself questions like, what type of books do I want to read? Do I want to read sociology books or theology books or leadership books or business books? What type of podcast do I want to listen to? What kind of conferences do I want to attend? Like, I live with intentionality. Where do I want to take my family? What area do I want to grow in my relationship with my wife or with my kids? I'm asking what about the future? What new goals do I want to achieve? And so it sets me up to live with intentionality. So I'm constantly growing myself, that when the leadership challenges come, and they will, that you are strong enough, right? You're mature enough to weather some of those down seasons.
Yeah. Wow. Great point, Terence. Great point. And ditto. I just really feel always welcome cognitive conflict at the top. Leaders, it is okay to welcome it. We're trying to train other leaders to be acceptable to cognitive conflict with making decisions that are important. And let's collect our whys and build our foundation moving forward. And I love what you all just said, and the challenges of a leadership role as a young woman in a male-dominated field and a civilian. We have to maintain a level of confidence in our own thoughts. So when that cognitive conflict does exist, you can stay strong with making your own decisions, because we didn't come this far not knowing anything. And I think a lot of times, and I agree with reading, I'm reading Political Brain, I'm reading When We Stand very, very soon as well again. And it's just, if we keep having that exposure, experiences, and the education, I think that we will definitely be great future leaders and produce future leaders as well.
Absolutely. That was some great insight. If I could add just one quick thing, I've learned a thing called it's always self. It's always self. It's always you run into leadership issues when you haven't continually reevaluated where you are. My first obstacle was knowing my weaknesses and what I wasn't good at. Like, I know what my strengths are. If I'm good at talking in public and helping people and building people up, but I'm not good at sitting down and doing the gritty behind the scenes work of the phone calls, the organization of the numbers. I can't sit down and do it. Me recognizing that now allows me to say, all right, this is what I can speak about next time, and who I need with me, and who you surround yourself with that can help me in that space. And now write those goals down. I realize in the capitalistic world, we write goals down for what we want to have. I want money here. I want a better job, this and that. Well, in order to get more money, in order to get a better job, in order to get better qualified, you have to then reinvest in self. In order to do that, you have to reevaluate where you are at this moment and what you need to get better at, and then set that plan, like you said. So all that's amazing. That like you said, I run to a different obstacle every stage of my development, and it just opens up another opportunity to be transparent and see where am I lacking. Is it how I communicate? I've had an issue a couple years ago in the restaurant industry with just how I communicated with my staff. Not that I'm a hard nose and I'm fussing at people, but sometimes I come off very abrupt because I've done it for so long. It's easy to me, but now I'm a little more gentle with my approach, and I'm more in an education role. How do I teach you how to be like this? How do I teach you to appreciate your job, to understand what you come off at? So those things are it's always self reflect and see where I am and what I can be better at and how I come off to people. Guys, we've come towards the end. I think we gave some great nuggets of how to get in tune with ourselves and figure out what our why is, take that action, and also make sure that we are keeping it human. I wrote a piece the other day about fatherhood and how difficult it is to be yourself. So I applaud you all for being your amazing, genuine selves, and not only treating yourself like a human and understanding the transparency and the faults and the things that we go into, but also understanding that other people have those same slip-ups and mess-ups and faults, and that we're all in the same boat and all share a story for one another. When we stand, I think this is a true testament right here in this group, because I've only met a couple of you. Eric, I haven't met you yet, but I'll come to Houston and say what's up. But being able to be on this panel and see what we're all doing and seeing the effects, great effects that we're having when we all standing for something. You know what I mean? It can be different things, but if we stand for something, it all builds up to make a better community. I want to go next into this trail that you have, Terence, so we can see really what's going on, and I'm excited to watch it, man. So I think that's coming up next. So
I believe the book When We Stand will communicate this message to any individual who picks up the pages, that they are needed. One of the reasons why I believe this message matters at this very moment is because, we're nearing the end of a pandemic, hopefully, and we can't lose the core message that we've learned going through all of the struggles and the hurdles and the heartache and the loss and the grief that we've experienced during COVID-19. I'm hoping that this message specifically resonates with people of faith, because I believe that we have the hope of the gospel, we have good news, but also we need to display that in our actions. So we have this message that's able to communicate solidarity and togetherness, but ultimately God's love. And I'm so hoping and so excited to see how this message literally resonates with people who pick up the pages and go through these pages and understand that they are needed.
absolutely. Terence, got any
Yeah.
final words?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Erica, Brandon, and Kelsey, for being here. It's really awesome for us to be able to serve alongside one another. Thank you again. And if you've liked anything that we've said tonight, I hope it empowers you to or start you on this journey of your self-discovery, or even discovering what it is that you want to put your hands to. The difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is I feel it in my heart, but empathy is I feel it in my heart and I want it to come out through my hands in service, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we are all being called to serve in some capacity, in some way, and you are needed. That is the message of the book, and I hope that you get a chance to pick up a copy. So thank you for being here. And if you want to grab a copy, you can grab it wherever books are sold or in your local store.
Thank you.
All right, hold on. Y'all thought I forgot. I told you we were giving away a book. We're giving away a book. So I want to let y'all know who was the winner this evening. Neha Hassan. Neha Hassan is a winner of the book When We Stand. If you could, DM Love Beyond Walls on Instagram, Love Beyond Walls. Send a DM to Love Beyond Walls. Neha Hassan will make sure you get your book, your physical copy of When We Stand.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.